And we're recording.
Hooray!
Hooray! Kris Randazzo, am I pronouncing this right? I've heard enough, I think, from the podcast. We've met. When did we meet? Was it 2014? Or when I say meet, I mean chatted online.
Yeah.
Was it 2014? It was early days of my channel.
It was really early days of your channel. I reached out to you because I was a big fan, and I just wanted you to be on my show, and you graciously said yes.
I love talking to people. You know me. At this stage, even on Facebook, I just chat for way too long sometimes. People I get interrogation marks going. Okay, are you done? But and then we've been chatting for a while for a while on Facebook on the chat, and then you recently again invited me to your podcast. You're a busy man, as I realized recently, because I thought you were just doing the Geekade podcast. The Stone Age Gamer podcast, but you also do Waveback, which we have a history together. We tried to do the first episode together, and my internet connection and video recording abilities weren't exactly up to scratch. We ended up doing a whole episode and not being able to use it.
It was so good too.
It was super
so good.
But the podcast is actually now doing well. How many episodes have you recorded?
Of Waveback, we just recorded episode 52, which is for Kirby's Adventure for NES, which was a lot of fun because my co-host Matt he's never played it before, so the music was all new to him, and it's always fun when he picks if he picks a game I haven't played or I pick a game he hasn't played, and it's a blast.
So you do two podcasts, and I realize you do another one.
I do three podcasts.
My God, and I thought I was busy. How? And you do this one with your wife, isn't it?
Yeah, it's my wife and one of my partners at the website, Evan, good friend of mine. That one's easy. That one's it's a TV podcast called This Week's Episode, and we all take turns picking TV shows to make each other watch. And really, my contribution is to occasionally pick a show and make goofy pictures for the podcast episodes, like just absurdly poorly photoshopped mashups of whatever news stories were talked about in whatever TV shows we discussed.
I haven't listened to this one. I will in time. I listened to a few episodes of the Waveback as well, and obviously the Stone Age Gamer. But yeah, I like Waveback. You genuinely love video game music.
I do. Waveback is a ridiculously personal show to me. My two biggest passions in life are video games and music, and that cross section of video game music and how much I love it it's always been something I wanted to talk about, and I didn't really want to try to fold it into Stone Age Gamer because that's just it's kind of its own thing, and I didn't really want to turn it into a video game music focused podcast. And I was listening to I came across the Atari 2600 Game by Game podcast, which is hosted by this super nice guy named Ferg, and he does this show all by himself. And he just basically the whole idea is that he was going through every Atari 2600 game ever made, and you just do an episode about every game and just keep going throughout them. And I was blown away by this podcast. I absolutely loved it. I love listening to him talk about each one of these games with so much personality and so much reverence for them. That kind of inspired me to do. Well, maybe I can do a podcast that I truly love about a subject that I know that I love, but I can do it solo. So I started doing the Waveback podcast, and the first chunk of episodes of it were just me by myself. And at a certain point, I decided that it's probably more interesting for people to listen to me have a conversation than to me just talk to myself. So that's when you came in. Actually, was when I was trying to look for a co-host, and you graciously accepted. And that episode was so good. I was so bummed when it went under, and then schedules and stuff just kind of mixed up because I'm in New Jersey in the United States, and there's a bit of a time
this episode
difference.
It was we had to find a suitable time, so
yeah. And I eventually I had a co-host, Vicky, for a good long while, and she was great. She was a lot of fun to talk to. But
I heard a few with her. Yeah, they were very nice.
She introduced me to a lot of stuff that her video game tastes are very different from mine. So I got to listen to these great soundtracks from games like Risk of Rain, stuff I've never even heard of, and that was a lot of fun.
That's great. That's why you need a co-host to introduce you to different stuff, like or somebody else to introduce you to different stuff, like the Wonder Boy soundtrack, which is now something
one of my all-time favorites. Yeah, that was a big deal. Well, Wonder Boy was something I had only heard of before, and then you did a cover of your first cover from Wonder Boy, and I was so impressed with the song that I went back and downloaded the game on the Wii Virtual Console and played through it, and it just blew me away. And that's one of my all-time favorite games.
It's fantastic. I love hearing stuff like that when somebody checks a game just because they like the music or that. And it's not just from me; it's from another, whoever covers the tune, or somebody got introduced to a new experience or a new game or a new platform. I love hearing stuff like that, stories like that. So you have a new co-host now for the Waveback, haven't you?
Yeah, I do. His name is Matt Ramo, and he directs for my website Geekade. He directs a wrestling comedy show called Ring the Bell. It's on YouTube. It's I don't know anything about professional wrestling. It's never been my thing. I just don't get it. But even I think this show is funny, which is absolutely ridiculous. He's a very funny guy, and the host of that show is a guy named JR Perez, and they just crack these jokes, and I get most of them because I also have my co-host on Stone Age Gamer. He writes a weekly wrestling series of just called Why I Love Wrestling, so I kind of have a tertiary knowledge of wrestling because I have to edit his stuff before we post it, and it's a funny show. It's a really funny show. And when Vicky unfortunately couldn't do the show Waveback anymore, I put out the feeler saying I needed to find a new podcast co-host for Waveback, and Matt volunteered, and I was like, well, what do you know about video game music? He said, I know that I love it. So we kind of went from there, and he's introduced me to, like, I've never spent any time with ActRaiser, and it's one of his favorite games, and he's introduced me to the soundtrack to that. Next episode, because we take turns picking, like, who's going to pick a game. He picked Strider for NES, which I have barely played. I've played the arcade version a lot, but I've almost never played the NES version of Strider, so I'm really looking forward to listening to that music.
Wow. Actually, I didn't know there was a version on the NES.
Yeah, it's really different from the arcade version. It's one of those, you kind of like how Rygar is, like, there's the arcade game of Rygar, and then there's the NES version, or Ninja Gaiden, or Bionic Commando, where they're just these totally different games with the same premise, I guess because they didn't think the arcade quarter muncher style would necessarily work on NES.
Yeah.
And Strider's a totally different game for NES, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Rygar is different as well. I mean, I'm actually fixing a Rygar PCB.
Really?
PCB at the moment, yeah. And as it happened, I found Rygar for the NES as well. It's quite different. I mean, it's not. Yeah. It's interesting, but I love. Obviously, I love music. I think you're probably the person that matches my love for video game music to that extent. One thing I love about what I do on the channel is that it's discovering new music that I had never heard of. Like, you get suggestions from people or saying, check out the soundtrack from this, or do this track, or and it's like, I always check the music. I always check the soundtrack they recommend, and I've discovered some fantastic music. A lot of it is from JRPGs as well, which is not a genre I would be into at all. Plus, nowadays I don't have the time to get deep into a JRPG. But
same here.
Very, very cool music from these games. How long then does it take to prepare one of those Waveback? Because I remember, obviously you need to listen to the whole soundtrack, especially if you don't know the game. You need to experience the game and play it, and then write down your thoughts and analysis of some of the tunes.
Well, that's actually a really interesting point. One of the things that Matt and I have tried to do is, if we don't know the other game, we want to go in completely dry. So, for example, he won't even listen to the tracks beforehand if I pick something, and he'll give me his gut reactions for hearing the songs for the first time on the show, which is really interesting because then we get my perspective. Like, for example, on this Kirby episode, I know Kirby's Adventure for NES is one of my all-time favorite NES games. I adore that game, and I love the music up and down. I know it backwards and forwards, and so he's coming at it with this perspective of, I'm hearing this for the first time. I have absolutely no idea how it relates to the stage, and it's really fun to get those kind of impressions of, well, what does this music make you feel? And what kind of stage do you think this is attached to? And it's always fun to kind of get that perspective of how well does the music communicate that on its own without the visual aid of the actual piece of the game. So that's super fun. So like this Strider one, for example, I do a bunch of research beforehand because we like to spotlight the creators of the music. The first chunk of the episode is always about a brief history of the game and a brief history of the composer when available, and because I think that's super important. That everyone knows the Super Mario Brothers theme, but not everybody knows who Koji Kondo is. Yeah. You did Super Mario Land, for example. It's one of my absolute favorite soundtracks, and Hip Tanaka is amazing. He's done so much incredible work, and it's stuff that people know. And I mean, geez, especially here in America, we just talked when you were on my show about how big the Game Boy and stuff was here. Everybody's played Super Mario Land. Everybody of a certain generation, and they know that music, but they have no idea who Hip Tanaka is and all the other stuff that he did. I always think it's important to point out who these people are and what other music they've done. So that's a big part of doing the research, because that stuff's not always readily available. I've wanted to do an episode on Kid Icarus, Myths and Monsters, because I love Kid Icarus, and there was a Game Boy sequel to it that has really cool music.
Oh, really?
But the game was it's really cool music, but the game was developed by Toei, and they didn't put credits in their games because they didn't want people poaching talent. So I can't find out that. I've seen a bunch of people say online that Hip Tanaka did the soundtrack to the Game Boy sequel, and I'm like, there's no way that's him, because just stylistically it doesn't match him at all.
You kind of just know, especially at those times where composition was heavily limited by hardware. They weren't as free to explore different genres. So there's sort of a trademark of a lot of composers that is not just limited to their musical style, but also limited to their hardware. So sometimes you hear a soundtrack and you go, that's Kino Yamashita. I know who that is. I never heard it before, but I know who that is. It's almost like when you hear somebody doesn't know Guns N' Roses and they hear a song they've never heard from Guns N' Roses and they go, that's Guns N' Roses. I know, because
that's Axl. There's no way. There's nobody else sounds like that.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
No, please.
I was just gonna say, another example is David Wise. You always know when an 8-bit David Wise song comes on. I remember being a kid, and even I pieced together when I played Donkey Kong Land on Game Boy. I was a huge Donkey Kong Country fan. I loved the music, I loved the world, I loved that entire reinvention. And I remember when Donkey Kong Land was released, which was the Game Boy pseudo sequel to it, I listened to that music and I said, this has to be written by the same guy that did Wizards and Warriors 2. Not realizing that was the same guy that did most of the Donkey Kong Country 1 soundtrack as well, but just the instrumentation of it, the kinds of sounds that he squeezed out of the Game Boy are so similar to the kinds of sounds he squeezed out of an NES. It's even as a kid, not paying attention to credits, that's the same guy that did Wizards and Warriors 2 that did this music in Donkey Kong Land. And it was fun discovering later that I was actually true. So
that's pretty cool. So I don't know the Donkey Kong Country that much. I know a lot of people have played, most people have played it except me, it seems. But for me, that's the sound that a lot of people, equate to David Wise when they see the name of Donkey Kong Country. But for me, it's always been the Wizards and Warriors series and other stuff. I'm actually hoping to do one of these episodes with David Wise at some point. So we'll see if that happens. He sort of agreed in principle, but we'll have to find a suitable date for him. These guys are busy. So
I would watch the heck out of that.
Yeah. So how busy are you with the podcast? Because 3 podcasts is a lot, and I've seen your name come up as a guest in a few other podcasts on Geekade as well. So you on the mic all the time.
Well, it's all right. So Waveback is only twice a month, so that's nice. I also don't edit Stone Age Gamer and this week's episode. Evan does that, so that's a huge chunk of time off my plate, I edit Waveback, but that's not super hard because like around 30% of the episode is just music. So there's a big chunk I can just go, and there we go. Ta-da.
Yeah.
But, Monday nights I record this week's episode. Tuesday nights I record this week's episode. Sorry, Stone Age Gamer. And then Wednesday, twice a month, I record Waveback. And I do a lot of the research and the show notes and stuff for those episodes while I'm at work. I wake up extra early in the morning and I spend at least an hour, editing articles for the website every morning. So for promoting them on Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff, I do that before the kids wake up so that, because once the kids wake up, then that's kind of it. Like, this is one of those weird situations where my daughter's asleep and my son's helping my wife do something around the house, and so she's very graciously agreed to keep the kids off my hands so that I can do this show. But yeah, it's one of the reasons I can get away with, like, say, doing this week's episode is because Karen, my wife, is involved. So we're not actually losing time with one another. We're spending time with one another. And also, we get to watch those TV episodes with each other, which is fun. Because
I love the idea of doing a podcast with your wife. Actually, that's great. I tried to get Fiona actually to. We might still do it yet, but she has amazing travel stories. She lived in Iraq, she lived in China, she lived in New Zealand and Australia and Saudi. Like, she lived in tons of places. Actually lived there, for a few years. So she's crazy stories, and I'd love more people to hear them. But she's very camera shy, so we'll see how that happens. But I love the idea of having a common kind of podcast or time with your wife, because in the chaos that is life, you realize sometimes you don't actually have that much time to even just chat with your partner sometimes.
That's very true. That's very true. And actually, that's the entire thing of this week's episode is we're doing the website, and Evan was helping out with doing his portion of the website stuff, and he said, I never get to actually talk to you anymore. So I said, well, let's do a podcast. So every week I get to talk to Evan, and every week I get to spend that time with Karen. And so that's kind of the point of it. I mean, the show's got, it doesn't have a very big following or anything. The only show that we do that has any sort of following is Stone Age Gamer. The rest of it we just do because we want to do it. Yeah. that's the whole point.
So likewise for this podcast, it's a very self-indulgent exercise. It's just an excuse for me to talk to people I want to talk to, and if people watch it, it's all bonus. But ultimately, it's just for me to have a chat and take the time to have a chat. Stone Age Gamer podcast has been around for a while, though. When did it start? How did it start? Was it always the same lineup?
Oh boy. All right. So Stone Age Gamer podcast. Let's see. What's the story of this? So Dean DeFalco was my partner on Geekade, which is the website that we had. He had always wanted to do his own website, and he created a website called Geek Life, G33KLIFE. And he was a coworker of mine in a comic book store in North Jersey, and he wanted to know if I wanted to be involved with the website at all and wanted to do a podcast of some flavor. So we started the Geek Life podcast, where me and him and somebody else, I don't even remember who the third person, it was this guy Eddie, and the three of us sat around and talked about video games for a little while, and that lasted like 3 or 4 episodes before I realized I just didn't have the time for it. So at one point, Dean decided that he wanted to reboot his website and take it much more seriously, and he got in contact with my friend Evan. The three of us knew each other, and the two of them got this whole thing in their mind that they wanted to make a new website, and they wanted me to be involved. They wanted me to be editor-in-chief, and I said, absolutely not. There's no way I would have time for that in my life. Like, I work retail, I'm married, and a kid on the way. Like, it's just no way I'd have time for that. And but I could not resist, because they're like, all right, well, can we at least ask your opinion on things as we're putting things together? I said, oh, of course. So they'd start talking to me about this, that, and the other thing, and eventually I just kind of kept being a part of it, and they said, all right, fine, that's it, I'm doing it. Color me in, I'm part of it. And Dean wanted, one of the things he wanted to do as part of the new website was a video game podcast, which he called the Stone Age Gamer podcast, not realizing that StoneAgeGamer.com is not only a thing that exists, but it's kind of a big thing. So we did, I think, 13 episodes of the Stone Age Gamer podcast before I went into a video game store, Digital Press, and I mentioned that I was on the Stone Age Gamer podcast to the guy behind the counter. We were just chatting, and I was like, "Oh man, I love your EverDrives." I'm like, "You do? Do I sell EverDrives?" Okay, cool, man. And so I went home and I started looking up. I was like, "All right, what is this? Oh no, there's a whole website." So I reached out to Stone Age Gamer. I went to their customer support and I said, "Look, we just started a podcast and we accidentally called it the same name as your website. What do you want us to do about that? Like, we could rename it if you want. Just kind of let us know if this is okay with you." And they sent back this hilarious response about like high-powered lawyers and stuff like that. Like, it was really, really funny. It was a joke. It was we've contacted our crack team of high-powered lawyers and like mice in suits and all that. It was really funny. And they basically just said they listened to our show and they liked it, and if we wanted to, we could be their official podcast, and we could keep it on our website. They could use our name, and they would be a sponsor, and we just keep doing what we do, and then we can kind of cross-promote one another. It was the luckiest thing ever.
That's great, and that's so nice to hear as well when stuff like that happens, yeah.
Oh yeah, it was great, and the guy in charge is named Ryan Cross. He's a super nice guy. We've had him on the show a couple of times. He's actually due to come back on the show pretty soon because he's just he's a really interesting guy to talk to because he started this Stone Age Gamer website, and he's got all these really great stories about the different products that he's gotten involved in. And Crixie, I think is how he pronounces the guy who makes EverDrives that they have officially licensed from him. Like, it's really, really fascinating stuff. So when we started the Stone Age Gamer podcast, it was just me and Dean. Then I very quickly realized that I wanted my friend Dan involved. Dan is my current co-host. He's been pretty much the steady factor ever since like episode 4 or 5 or something. He's a super cool guy. I've known him for years and years and years. He knows a bunch about video games. We worked at Toys R Us together. It was good times. But man, we had my friend Mike was on the show for a while. He's another one of my favorite people. He's just not a great talker, so he eventually kind of left the show because he just wasn't really jiving with him. Dan's wife was on the show for a while, Tiff. That was kind of that was a weird situation because Tiff was great on the show, but Dan and I had been talking about how what the shows tended to boil down to, even when Dean was involved in it, it tended to boil down to just me and Dan talking about games, and that was where the show shined the most. So we eventually, had to ask. We asked Tiff to leave the show because it was working better with just me and Dan, and that was kind of a tough situation.
That's
because
a tough thing to do, yeah.
I like Tiff. She's a super cool person. She's really interesting to talk to, and I love it when she still contributes to the site from time to time, and I love it when she does. But at the end of the day, what the whole point of us doing the show was me and Dan just want to talk to each other about games every week. So, and Dean wound up he was fine with taking a leave from the show too because he has his own thing. He does the Vest and Friends podcast. He streams games. He does all manner of stuff. Dean is a wild human being. Yeah,
he streams on the Geekade Twitch channel, doesn't he?
Yeah, he streams on Twitch. He makes a YouTube show called Bit Bites. He does all manner of stuff. I tend to pick one thing and stick to it for a long time, and he jumps from project to project to project. I wish I had a fraction of his energy. He's such an idea guy, and that's kind of why the website works, is because me, Dean, and Evan are the 3 people involved in it, or the 3 people in charge, and like we all come from these very different perspectives. Yeah. And I know Dean and Evan tend to butt heads a lot, and I'm kind of this middleman between the 2 of them. Like, I kind of smooth things out because they both have similar perspectives, but they go about it from very different ways. So that's a lot of fun.
I very much like the chemistry that you have with Dan, and Dan is such a big personality. Like, I'd listen to him just talk on his own as well. Like, he's great. He's got great anecdotes, and he's a great sense of humor as well.
Yeah.
He's got a good podcast voice as well. He's got this deep voice.
He is great. He was hosting our comic book podcast for the longest time until he Dan. All right, here's a fun story with our comic. We had a comic book podcast called Paper Cuts, and it was going for a long time. And then Dan approached me and said, I want to do a different comic podcast because this one's really silly and I want to take it a little more seriously. And we talked about it and we're like, okay, we're going to end Paper Cuts and you're going to start this new podcast. And then he did 2 episodes and stopped. It's like, and now we don't for a while we didn't have a comic podcast. We do have one now. This gentleman by the name of Jordan, who's also a relatively clever individual. I like him a lot. He approached us at a convention, Too Many Games, and said he liked our website. He was looking for a home for a comic book podcast. And so we took him on, and he's doing great. I've been on his show once or twice, so that was fun. No, once. He was on Stone Age Gamer once. I was on his show once. That was it.
I see Stone Age Gamer is still sharing some of your podcasts as well. It's I've seen on their Twitter account.
Yeah, I run that.
Okay, fair enough.
I do their Twitter and their Facebook, and they also they hired me to write for them too. They did a blog page, which is on hold at the moment. Their Stone Age Gamer blog, because they're launching a new version of their website in a couple of weeks. I think it's next week or the week after. It's supposed to be it looks really fancy. They showed me a little piece of it. It looks super cool. I can't wait for it to launch and get back to writing for them, because that's been really fun. They were super nice to offer me this blogging job where they're like, you can just write 1 article a week on whatever topic you want. Wow. And go nuts. And so I did, and that's been super fun. Sometimes it's exhausting to try to come up with one, but it's a really good challenge because I love to write, and it's really hard to write when you're not inspired to write. Yeah. And it's a really good exercise to make yourself do that anyway, because it was a paid job. It wasn't like a Geekade where it's like, well, if I miss something, then nobody cares because it's just our thing. We're just doing it for ourselves. But this was like, I have a deadline, and if I don't write something, then I don't make that money that week, and that's less money that we have to spend on food and bills and stuff. So it's been really, really good for me to have that in my life. And I've written some things that I'm super proud of, and I've written some things that I'm like, wow, that's garbage. But it's there, it's done, it's edited, it's in English, so I'm good. And that's been a lot of fun.
Writing is a tough exercise, especially when you have to, because it's still an artistic pursuit of sorts. And if you're a painter or a musician, you can take a think it can take a rest, or you don't necessarily have to come up all the time with stuff. But when you have to come up with an article in writing, and suddenly you don't know what to write about, or you don't know how to approach it, or it's a very tough exercise. It's a lot tougher than people realize, I think. I've come up with so many ideas that I've started word barfing, and they just come out. I've had these thoughts that I want to express, and I just can't make them happen. I just can't get them on the page in a way that's interesting to read, because that's kind of the other thing, is I always want to make what I'm writing accessible. I can't just assume that the other person knows what I'm talking about or has the knowledge of what I'm talking about. So that's an especially difficult thing that's part of that, because I'll come up with these ideas for and the other thing is just trying to be more broad, is because I am a Nintendo fanatic, and that's like the majority of what it is that I know, surprise. That's the majority of what goes through my head. I'm still reeling from the Nintendo Direct from a couple of days ago with the Smash Brothers reveal that blew my head up. But I try to be more rounded. I try to write about other things, because I'm writing not just for myself, I'm writing for Stone Age Gamer. So they carry products that range from everywhere from Atari to TurboGrafx to Sega Genesis, Mega Drive. So I try to write about my experiences with those as well, and try to give them equal weight. But then you also kind of have to pay attention to, well, how much of it is gaining traction. I look over on their Facebook page, and since I'm an admin of the page, I get to see how many engagements there are, and how many people are clicking on things, how many people are seeing things. And certain types of articles, if I write about Nintendo, they tend to get way more views than the other stuff that I write. So that goes for anything in the gaming world. Nintendo will always get more views. That's just the way it is.
It is the way it is. It's weird too. Yeah, just thinking back to when I was a kid, like it was such a 50-50 split, you know. It was like there were the kids that sat at the Genesis lunch table, and there were the kids that sat at the Nintendo lunch table. And you're like, well, I'm playing Phantasy Star, well, I'm playing Final Fantasy 3, you know, I'm playing Donkey Kong Country, I'm playing Vector Man. Like that was like a split, you know. And when you look at it now, it's so. There's definitely a subset of people that are, oh, Genesis is the best, but far and away, you still have that, you know, the Nintendo fanism that's out there that is I am definitely a part of, but it's also weird to see how volatile it gets, and podcast for another podcast.
No. I mean, there's no agenda for this thing. We just start talking and wherever it's going. I have no scripted questions or anything like that. So, but no, it's interesting because Nintendo has been such a big part of people's childhood in America, and you know, America being so representative on at least on the internet with the articles and YouTube channels, just because of the sheer volume of material that is produced. It's obviously what people are exposed a lot more to, and I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but yeah, it was such a huge iconic part of your childhood, because in the US, bar a few exceptions, it was just Nintendo. Europe had a lot of stuff, like there was computers, there was Sega, there was some Nintendo, but it wasn't just one thing. And even in the computer realm, we had, you know, Amstrad and Commodore and MSX in some small pockets of population, Spectrum, you know, so we had a wide array of different things, but for the vast majority in the US, it was Nintendo, and it's affected the childhood of so many now grown men.
You're absolutely right. It was huge for me. It actually started with Atari for me, but it really got driven home by Nintendo. But it was imagination for me, and that's a weird thing as a parent now, seeing, because there's always been this kind of stigma with you know, kids playing too many video games or whatever, and I've always been very thankful that my parents recognized that I was never zoning out in front of video games. I was experiencing them, you know. I was just enthralled by them. Then I would play video games, and then I would go outside and pretend to be Link, you know, running through the woods, and I'd grab a couple of sticks, and I'd be Link with my sword, or I'd be Mario jumping down a pipe or whatever. And, you know, I remember dressing up. My mom made me a Link costume for Halloween one year, and everyone thought I was Peter Pan, and they were like, "Oh wow, Peter Pan outfit." I'm like, "I'm Link," and they're like, "Oh, I don't know who that is." But I was so thrilled with it. You know, I would get swords, you know, toy sword and shield from a toy store or whatever, and I would pretend to be Link. And, you know, I was fascinated by that, all the different worlds, and, you know, especially going back to Atari. I don't know how much experience you had with Atari or whatever.
None. Well, none at the time. I do now, but yeah.
It was, you know, Atari graphics are like nothing. You know, there's squares, there's almost nothing to them, but the box art is just amazing. I mean, the pictures up here, those are from Tim Lapatino's Art of Atari book, and I'm watching what you're pulling down here.
The same thing with the video pack, or the you know, the
oh, okay,
and it was just similar shitty graphics, but the pictures were so.
They're amazing.
And
then you'd look at that picture. I'd look at the pictures, and then I'd play the games, and my imagination would just fill in those gaps, you know. Yeah. And I remember I used to get like all kinds of paper, and my sister and I invented our own video game system, and we'd draw our own ads for it and stuff. And I mean, you should see my office at work. I've got all the old, like, Now You're Playing with Power posters hanging up in my cube at work, because I still look at those things, and I'm just fascinated by them. I love that transition between artwork and game. And we talked about this a little bit when you were on my show, that level of imagination that, like, you know, you'd see the pixel graphics and the hand-drawn art or whatever, and you get a lot of instances where now graphics can look just like the artwork, but you also get a lot of stuff like, I mean, even something as recent as like Super Mario 3D World on Wii U, you have the hand-drawn Mario and the in-game 3D Mario, and like there's still that little neat connection there, like the little disconnect between like this is a 3D model and this is a flat image of a cartoon, and it's still kind of, you can still kind of piece that together. But
I spent quite the same though. Yeah,
it's definitely not quite the same.
It was such a huge gap required of it was a lot of imagination was required of the kids at the time to just make the best of a game, because that's all you had, an 8x8 pixel kind of tile map, and then with only so much displayed on screen. But you sort of naturally bridged the gap between what was in the manual and what was on the cover. It was actually a part of the game, which was really, really interesting. The front cover was a part of the game as much as the content of the cart itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Same with the instruction manual. Like, you had to read the books back then, and some of those manuals are just great. Like,
there's entire books and stories.
Yeah. I used to bring those to school. Like, you had to bring a book to school to read for story time, or like we'd all sit and read our own books. I'd bring the Super Mario Brothers manual, the Zelda 2 manual. Oh my God, the Zelda 2 manual that has the actual Legend of Zelda in it. This huge thing in there. I loved that story. Loved all those stories, and I love the cartoons that are legitimately terrible. The Super Mario Brothers Super Show and the Legend of, they're awful, but they were my life when I was a kid. I would zip home from school every day and watch the Mario Super Show and wait for every Friday they'd have the Zelda episodes, and they were the best to me, because even if the quality was bad, it was still, I'm watching a Zelda cartoon. This is so cool. And it had all the sound effects from the games in it too, and that stuff was great. But sharing that kind of no, go ahead.
No, you have kids. Do you see that same sense of awe in their eyes when something video game, discover something from a video game, or when they see something on TV that it is referencing a video game? Because back then that's all we had. Like, there was such a limited supply. There was no internet. There was only limited. I don't know about America, but we didn't have cable, so there was like 4 channels or 3 channels on TV.
Yeah, not for a while after I grew up. Not until.
And then even shops, I mean, you couldn't just get any game anytime you want. You had to go to a shop if you were lucky to have one in your town. So there was such a starvation of content that whenever you saw like a Mario in this case, or with Sonic for me or whatever, but or even a logo of your favorite console, like you're just, oh my God,
that was the best.
Do you see that in your kids? Because it's hard to. It's easy for us to say things were better back then, which they weren't, But with all the extra, like this flood of content that we have nowadays, there's an oversaturation of just available stuff. Like, but do you still see that in your kids when they see a new Nintendo product or?
Actually, yeah, when they see new games. That was fun. I watched the Nintendo Direct with my son John. We like watching those together, which is super neat. Like, he doesn't get as much out of it as I do. But he'll see new things and he'll be like, "Oh, that's cool. Can we play that? I want to play that now." And I'm like, "Well, it hasn't come out yet." So like, he's really excited for the new Kirby game coming out next week. We played the demo. He actually asked me to play the demo of it again because he thinks it's really neat. Not as much, because I have so much.
Yeah.
I have everything that I've had since I was a kid. I have literally thousands of games, and so I also have like Raspberry Pi hooked up to my TV. So pretty much I have access to any old game he would want to try, and so it's such a different experience for him, because I started him as young as I could to introduce him to this stuff, but I also don't want to get him I want him to still play outside, which he does. Yeah. He loves playing outside. He loves trucks more than anything in the world. So, but every now and then we'll play a racing game or something. Like right now, he's totally into Bridge Constructor Portal, which is this new game that's it's about building bridges, but it's also related to Portal. Gladys narrates the whole thing.
I wanted to get that, actually.
You got to get it. It's great. Yeah. It's really cool. It's just got a lot in common. It reminds me a lot of like Lemmings.
You know what? I forgot it existed. I need to get that. I do.
It's really great.
I love anything Portal. I love it. There's been tons of Flash games by fans as well. Like I've played most of them. Yeah, sorry.
No, that's awesome. I tried showing him the original Portal about a year ago, and he thought it was all right, but he was not as into it as he is this bridge constructor one. I think it's because it involves building things and forklifts, because he loves forklifts. So you have to drive these little forklifts and get them from point A to point B without crashing them and all that stuff. So he's really into that. He was really digging Ukulele. Before that came out. That game's all right, but he really, really liked the characters, and he liked some of the humor in it. Like he thinks Trouser is really cool. He doesn't get the... Have you played that game at all, Ukulele?
I have not, nor have I played any of the Banjo-Kazooie games or anything.
Yeah, Banjo was never my jam. I never got into that, but this one I just kind of wanted to give it a try, because I like a lot of the people involved in it so much, and it's got a Grant Kirkhope score with a couple of David Wise tracks in there, so at the very least I'd get that out of it. So I picked up the game, and it's fun. It's all right. It's not 100% my cup of tea, and it's really hard to play following Super Mario Odyssey because it's just not nearly as polished.
Okay.
But I mean, there's a character in there who's a snake that's wearing a pair of shorts, and like he goes down the top of a pair of shorts, and then he's flattens out his tail at the bottom and then goes back up the other leg. So that's kind of how he stands, and his name is Trouser because he's a trouser snake. Like, Sean doesn't get that. But the game is full of that kind of humor. Yeah. So even I'll forgive so many of the game's faults because I'll get to just another bit that's just cracks me up,
There's layers. I love it.
There's layers of it. It's that very rare humor.
Yeah, it's never been my type of games, these even like the Mario N64 Mario type of environments. Even Banjo-Kazooie, I just never liked it, which is funny because obviously the name of the channel, Banjo Guy Ollie, was sort of inspired by the rhythm of the Banjo-Kazooie.
I didn't know that. That makes sense.
That was the first thing when I started the channel. The first few comments were, now do Banjo-Kazooie, you have to, with your name and all that kind of stuff. But it was was it intentional? I think it kind of was. I was looking for something that would sort of rhyme and have the same rhythm as something iconic gaming wise. So this, and obviously it's explicit enough to tell people what I do. But
it works.
How big is your collection then?
Well, let's see. I actually have it cataloged. All right. So this number doesn't involve digital stuff.
Yeah, I have it cataloged.
Yeah, well, I would go to different shows and stuff, and I had to keep track of what I have and what I didn't have because I'd start to forget. So, I mean, I omitted digital stuff from most of my library, like 3DS, and I'm kind of going back and adding those in now because now that I'm not playing my 3DS anymore, I want to keep track of what I had on that so I know which games I had access to, kind of a thing. But if I subtract, all right, so systems cataloged, I have 131 game consoles, and if I take that number away from my library, it's
31 game consoles.
Yeah,
actually,
they include some include like different colored N64s and whatnot, but yeah, it's a bunch, like Atari 130XE, 400, 600 XL, 800, a bunch of 2600, 2700 Junior, 5278, Jaguar CD, etc. That kind of stuff, and that adds up. It's a lot of stuff. And then as far as the games, if I subtract that number from there, it's over 2,500 games.
My God, yeah,
total.
And do you store it all in your house then, or?
I do. I had it in a storage unit for a long time, and that was very painful to have it in a storage unit because this is stuff that I love so much. I have a big background in video game retail. My first job was working at Funko Land, which was just amazing. And it was this retail chain that was out here. I don't know how much you know about Funko Land, but it was a great retail chain out here. And they had all the NES, Super Nintendo, Genesis, all that stuff. And they would have these shelves on the walls that were just shelves, rows and rows and rows of cartridges. And I just love being there. I just love being around all that stuff. And that was kind of when I started actually collecting. My manager, Steve, at the time, he had a binder that had all the games that he collected in. And he kind of taught me the basics of, you should go for a handful of cheap games just to kind of fill out your library a little bit and then pick the stuff you want and kind of build from there. So, I mean, I had all that stuff in my parents' house, and then eventually I grew up and had to move out, and so I put it all in a storage unit, and I kept some of it with me so that I could just, have it and play it and be around it and all that stuff. And then I eventually closed the storage unit and got it all in. Karen and I, after we were married, we got a house and had a basement in it, and so I had it all down there, but it was still very tightly packed. And now that Karen and I own this house that we're in, and this is my basement that I'm in right now, this wall right here is going to be shelves to house all my actual games. Right now, it's all in my garage. Not all of it. Most of it's in my garage. And I have a shelf next to me here that has a handful of the more current systems on it. And most of what I play these days is Switch. And you can see behind me, I have an old CRT. That's what I hook up an NES to, or a Super Nintendo, or a Genesis, or whatever. And whenever John and I want to play old games, usually if there's availability to do it, I'll hook it up to the CRT.
Yeah, but I love CRTs.
They're the best. My daughter is the destroyer of worlds, though. She has a personal vendetta against all physical media, so I can't put anything on shelves or even have a Nintendo, something with wired controllers. I just can't have it out with her around. She'll be like, start to eat it or pull it off the wall or whatever. She's a nutcase. So I have to wait till she's a little older to really start setting it up. But yeah, it's all here. It's all very tightly condensed, and I've flattened some boxes. Most of the games that are in boxes are kind of together again, and they're all in box protectors, and it just kills me to have them in a garage. I want them inside. I want them safe and warm. And
all these games, and you still don't have an MSX.
I still don't have an MSX.
You got
no MSX. I don't have a Neo Geo. I've always wanted an actual Neo Geo.
It's an expensive system to get into, the MSX. The games, well, you need an MSX2 at least, 2+ if you can. But the MSX2 will see you through most of everything. But then the games gets expensive. I mean, for €400 for, I don't know, Space Mambo or. So if you want any like even Vampire Killer, you're talking at least a good $100 or whatever. It gets really, really expensive. I have one set up there actually behind me. I have a CRT. That's my old MSX Philips CRT that I have here. I have about 20 CRTs, like between all the arcade machines and the I have broadcasting monitors. I have two big broadcasting monitors that I need to set up instead of this. The picture is just amazing on it.
I have a Commodore 64 monitor.
They're great.
They're really nice. The sound doesn't work on it, though. I don't know enough about fixing them, but it was my brother-in-law actually found it on a curb. It's like, hey, this says Commodore on it. Do you want it? I was like, yes, bring it. I have like 4 or 5. That's my Trinitron back there. That's my baby. That thing's got a gorgeous picture on it. I have an older Trinitron that's in my garage, and then I have 2 or 3 more CRTs in my parents' garage still, just because I didn't feel like moving them out of there, and they weren't using the space. But
once you get into them, they're not that hard to fix. A lot of it is capacitors, just leak or go bad. That's usually what it is. I fixed a few that it's that simple, just to get a new capacitors. But obviously you need a soldering station and desolder gun and that kind of stuff. But it's easy now. You said something interesting early on though, when you were talking about working in retail, because a lot of stuff I found with a lot of collectors is. There's a common sort of memory of the first time they ended up in a retail shop or picking games and going, there's so many games and everything on display with the nice display signs, and all that kind of stuff. I remember the first time I went to a shop as a kid and we were picking a game. I think it was Vampire Killer, and I remember looking around going, oh my God, I want to live here. It was just a fascinating, it was beautiful memories. But one of the first thing you remember when you start collecting or when you start displaying your stuff is trying to get your collection to look like what it was in the shop, or looking like a shop, And it's a common memory I find with a lot of collectors. It's that that first memory of being in a retail shop for the first time and going, oh my God, there's so many games here. I never realized there was so many games for my system, I'm a nut. I know you're a Nintendo nut. I'm a crazy nut for anything that has the MSX logo on it. I will pretty much buy anything with an MSX logo. And it seems that a lot of Nintendo guys feel the same way. Whenever Nintendo releases something, we discussed about the what was it called, the cardboard thing.
Labo, yeah.
Yeah, Labo. So is that actually out, or is that coming out? Or
it's next month.
Oh wow. And I didn't think there would be, but they're such a huge, it fascinated people's imagination, and especially kids, to an extent that I actually realize. It's beautiful to see like kids wanting to actually do stuff with the whatever, build things. It's the new Lego, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Lego's still a big thing. I mean, my niece is really into Legos and stuff. But yeah, that's super fun. A question about the MSX stuff. What's the packaging like on MSX games? Because a big part of my collecting has always been, I love the uniformity. Like I remember getting, once I had like 4 or 5 Atari boxes, lining them up was just like, wow, they all kind of match. And I wonder if that's...
For the MSX, you get just a wide array of sizes. You get big Japanese stuff like that.
Yeah.
You get the Konami boxes also come in different shapes and sizes. So I mean.
Oh wow.
So nothing.
That would drive me so crazy.
And then you have the Sony boxes, which are square. You have bigger versions of that. It's just. Even in these, you have different sizes.
Oh man. Yeah, that would drive me bananas. That was one of the things I always really liked about Sega stuff. Like, I was a Nintendo kid, but I mean, that's what we had. We had Nintendo, and that was kind of like a big part of it. Like, you always defended the console you had because that's what you had. And but I was always kind of jealous of the Sega kids because they came in those plastic boxes, and they were reusable. You could put them back in there. They wouldn't crush when you stepped on them. And I mean, I've lost so many Nintendo boxes over the years just because I was a kid and I'd step on them or my mom would throw them away or something. But the hard plastic cases of Genesis games and Master System games, like those wouldn't get thrown away as much because they were so tangible. And I was always jealous of that.
Even the damaged ones are still better than most cardboard boxes from them.
Oh my god, yeah. Because I mean, I've spent a ton of money on like video game box protectors, which are those like plastic sleeves that the boxes go in, because I don't want to ruin my Chrono Trigger box or my Super Metroid box or. But the Genesis stuff, like I got a complete copy of Musha for Genesis. It's fine. It's good. Yay.
Yeah, MSX had a variety of stuff. So these guys were all plastic, so they don't age. They're just the Konami stuff. Yeah, you can see it's chewed up. But
oh wow, I see that.
Nice. There was inside they had a plastic.
Look at that! Is that the Konami logo embossed in there?
Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. Look at that. That's great.
Yeah, and then and the cart was in that. So the boxes are in relatively good shape still. It's just some corners sometimes get chewed up. This is a especially bad example. But my most of my Konami collection is almost pristine, just because they have these inserts inside.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, Konami was such a big developer of games on the MSX. It was interesting because they would develop the same stuff on the MSX and the Nintendo or Famicom system, and they would release those games sort of at the same time, but they had 2 teams working on each. The teams would share the assets between each other, like the musics or like the composition for the musics or even the tiles for the sprites or the tile maps, but then they would try and match each other's development, for the game. But sometimes you end up with games that were quite different. There's a Maze of Gallius for the Famicom is actually very different than the MSX version.
Castlevania, Metal Gear.
Yeah, Castlevania is incredibly. It's another game.
Yeah, it's just a totally different game.
Yeah, I'm surprised people still haven't discovered the Vampire Killer Castlevania for the MSX, because it is a very, very legitimate version of the game, much more so than the stuff you'd find on the Amiga, for example. it plays differently, and it's still familiar enough for a lot of Nintendo people to enjoy. Yeah, I'm surprised it hasn't, hasn't had more.
It just hasn't surfaced. It just Konami's never put any effort into re-releasing it here. It's my friend. It was my friend Tony. He's a huge. Look at that.
Yeah.
Look at that. It's gorgeous. My friend Tony, he's a big fan of Castlevania, and he's a huge fan of Castlevania, and he knows his stuff when it comes to video games, and he didn't know that
the manual. And anyway, so he didn't know about.
He didn't even know that the MSX version was a different game. He just had no idea, and it wasn't on the Wii Virtual Console or anything like that. Konami's never really tried to market that version here in America, and I think that's a big part of it. It's a darn shame. I don't understand why. It's not like there's a big language barrier there, and
it's a stunning game as well. I think it looks a lot better. Well, it's not that the NES version looks bad by any standard, but it's stunning. The color wise, it's so rich, and I mean, look at this.
And that's just it. It's still screenshots, and that was kind of the thing. I'm pretty sure Tony had seen screenshots of it before, and it looks like, it just looks like a different version of that game. No, you collect keys and go into doors. There's backtracking. There's wacky stuff going on there.
Yeah, it's cool. It's really cool. It's a very nice version. In fact, I played this one a lot more than I would play the NES one. Yeah. I think the music is probably better on the NES just because it had more channels and it could handle more. But I've a nostalgia for the MSX version for sure.
Yeah, understood.
What was your big game as a kid? What was the one that you would still replay now, or
There's so many of them. I don't think it got any bigger than Legend of Zelda for me. I guess I would have to say A Link to the Past, but really just kind of the build-up to A Link to the Past, too, because the original Legend of Zelda, first time I ever saw that was my sister had a friend over, and they had brought their copy of the game over. And I don't even remember who the friend was, but I remember walking into my bedroom, because we shared a room, and they were playing it in there, and just the sound of it was incredible to me. They were playing a dungeon, so it was the dungeon music that was just wow, that's eerie and kind of scary, and I don't know if I'm ready for that.
Yeah.
And so I kind of backed away from it, and eventually we got Zelda 2, and Zelda 2 just completely took over my life, because I did wind up playing more of Zelda 1. I don't remember if I beat it before I played Zelda 2, but I remember Zelda 2 was just a huge deal to me. So much so that my parents actually had to take it away from me for a little while, because I was having nightmares about it, because my game got erased. Because you had to do the hold reset and turn it off. And I remember one morning we were close to the end. We were on the second to last palace in the game, and I wanted to play it before I went to school, so I fired it up, and I wanted to give one more shot to trying to beat that one palace before I went to school. And I turned it on, and I must have not turned it off right the night before, because the game was gone. My progress was gone, and I was obliterated. I was I don't know what to do. And so I wound up having nightmares about that, and my parents took Zelda 2 away from me for a while. But playing Zelda 1 and just the original Zelda, and the way that captured my imagination, and then the obsession with Zelda 2 and the Zelda cartoon, all that stuff, and reading the manuals and the artwork that's involved in that, nothing else lit my imagination on fire. And then when A Link to the Past happened on Super Nintendo, I don't think I've ever. The only other time I've ever experienced something quite like that was maybe Super Metroid, because that was a similar experience. But turning on that game and reading the text, and just the intro with the polygonal Triforce swirling into the middle and the sword coming down, the way that it sounded like real instruments. It sounded like trumpets and strings, and
it was so cinematic as well.
Oh my God!
Presented.
You walk outside in that rain, and you see raindrops hitting things, and you look at it now, oh, that's a static image. Those raindrops are going to make that same animation no matter what they're hitting. But
no, they weren't. It was actually
when you're a kid. Exactly. It was rain. It was raining. It was amazing. And you get your sword and you open up you go through that whole intro thing. The first thing you do in the game is save the princess. And I'm like vibrating with excitement. But when those doors open to the sanctuary, when you save Zelda and the doors open, the rain is stopped and the Zelda theme plays on trumpets, I absolutely lost the colors in that game. There was green grass, the flowers are moving, the trees are. It was amazing. It was so amazing to me, and that was kind of like it for me. That was almost as big as it gets. I mean, Super Metroid is a similar experience where those I actually played in order. I played Metroid on NES and drew out maps on graph paper. I loved Metroid 2 on Game Boy, and the ending to that game really like got me. Where you find the baby. Did you ever play through Metroid 2?
Well, Super Metroid, I started actually a week ago. I never.
Oh,
played
wow!
Before. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, I love it. It's great. I mean,
it's great. Did you play the previous ones, Metroid 1 or 2? Or
I played the DS, the Game Boy Advance version of
Zero Mission.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the version of the first Metroid game. And Metroid 2 was only just remade as Samus Returns on 3DS, which is excellent.
Okay.
But Metroid 2 was so cool because not just because it was, you could now shoot up and down and all that kind of jazz and the way what it did to the visuals of Samus, but it told this story that, you were going to the home world of the Metroids and you have to eradicate the species. And this was Shadow of Colossus before Shadow of the Colossus was a thing. Yeah. Because I made it to the end of the game. You fight the Queen Metroid. You've basically eradicated this species. Like, you just completely killed a species. And then you kill the Queen, and you walk over to the screen, and you were just playing Super Metroid. That bit where the egg cracks open in the baby Metroid, that's the ending of Metroid 2. That's happening in the Game Boy game. You control that. You walk over, the egg cracks open, and the baby Metroid comes out. And I remember trying to shoot at it and run away from it. And I was like, wait a minute, it's making these cute little sounds. And I still don't know how the game communicated it. It's like, I bet it thinks I'm its mommy. And you just leave the game, and that was the end of the game. And then when Super Metroid happens and they play that intro, now this is before Zero Mission exists or anything, so they play the intro of that game, and to have it look like upgraded 16-bit visuals of those NES and Game Boy games, like playing through those ending sequences, I was like, and then when you get to Zebes in Super Metroid and you get to the planet and it's again raining, just like in Zelda, but you go down and you go down the tunnel that was the ending of the original NES Metroid, but now it's all destroyed. But it's using really, like, the tiles are in the same places, it's the same art, but just with a lot more detail, and it's destroyed. And you go to that spot, like, that's where I blew up Mother Brain. I did that. I remember that happening, and I was connected to that baby Metroid. And then the ending, I won't even touch on that. I wrote a whole thing. Well, getting back to the Stone Age Gamer blog, I wrote a whole thing about my favorite. No, it wasn't on Stone Age Gamer. It was Geekade. I wrote my favorite Metroid moments, and the whole ending sequence of Super Metroid I'll just recount over and over again.
You get that in the Wonder Boy series. Wonder Boy 2 ends up you kill the Mecha Dragon, and when you start Wonder Boy 3, you replay that last level, all beefed up, all the upgrades and all that. Mm-hmm. And that's the first boss. Straight away you meet the first boss. You kill the dragon, and now the game starts, and you've been transformed into a dragon yourself, and you have to.
That must have been so cool to play that in order.
Anytime,
that must have been so cool.
Anytime you had a game that referenced another game, it was like.
I can't believe Symphony of the Night,
because nothing had been done like that before.
No.
I think it's one thing that's hard to explain to younger gamers is that we came from a generation where there was nothing, and like nowadays everything has been codified. And I know there's new concepts sometimes that come up, and Celeste, is a really fine example, or Undertale, or that kind of stuff. But they're sort of iteration of stuff we've seen before. But at the time, like first there was nothing, and then there was video games. So, and all the codes that we find in games nowadays, and that make up those fantastic games that we find, weren't there. They were there to be invented, and when we first discovered them, like cross-referencing or certain aspects of gameplay, or even some simple stuff as a very nice save point,
the concept of backtracking.
The very concept of backtracking. In Metroid, it was just it was just. It was
for me. It was Blaster Master. Actually, remember the original Blaster Master? The first screen of that game, there's a little ledge above where you start that you can't possibly get to. And I remember thinking the first time I played the game, I want to know what's up on that ledge. And then you get to as soon as you get the hover ability, that was the first thing I did. I said, I'm going back to the beginning of the game. I want to know what's up on that ledge. And it turns out that was what you were supposed to do. That's where level 4 is. That was amazing to me, and nothing had done that before.
You discovered it by yourself because of clever level design as well. Because that was the first
exactly.
thing you see. Yes, all those codes were there to be discovered, and it was such an exciting time where you get a new game, because you'd play the game also to find out what new techniques the developers had applied, what new effects or what new gameplay, mechanics and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, how are they going to surprise you?
The gap from one generation of console to the other was so outstanding. Like you said, you played the first Zelda, it was actually scary, the first Zelda.
Yeah, that game scared me.
Yeah, it was genuinely
eerie,
uncomfortable in some dungeons. But then you play Legend.
Link to the Past.
Sorry, and suddenly just a gap, and the jump from one generation to the other was just so amazing. Like the trees looked like trees, the grass was grass. It was just amazing. And even the gap from whatever Atari to the NES was just. It was.
Oh my God!
Huge.
The first time I played Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah. Well, I told
Going
you about
from
my
Pitfall to Super Mario Brothers is like.
I told you about
crazy.
my experience of seeing Super Mario Brothers for the first time.
Oh yeah, you did.
I'm not going to repeat it. You watched it or follow the podcast.
Yeah, listen to Stone Age Gamer. It was a few episodes ago. It was Ollie was on telling great stories.
So, did you experience the Master System at all back then?
Yes, I did. My uncle had the Master System, and my neighbor Kris Randazzo had the Master System, and I thought it was super cool. I thought it was really interesting. But my uncle had Fantasy Zone 2, which I was totally into. I loved Fantasy Zone and Fantasy Zone 2, and Chris had. I played Astro Warrior over there. I played that version of Double Dragon, which was like. That was crazy, because the Master System version of Double Dragon is much more in line with the arcade one, and while it's got terrible collision detection, you could do 2-player mode. It was I don't know if I could. It was technically a better version of Double Dragon. I do like the kind of RPG elements they added to the NES version of Double Dragon, which was weird. But I definitely had Master System in my life at that point. Playing the 3D glasses over at Chris's house, and we had Astro Warrior 3D, and I was like, whoa, that's weird. But then I'd put on 3D glasses to play Rad Racer at my house, and that kind of stuff. I think the thing that really turned me off, and the reason I was so much more into the NES than the Master System, actually had a lot to do with the packaging. The Master System boxes are very simplistic a lot of the times, and just that white checkerboard thing, and the cartridges themselves, they had nothing on them. They had that one little strip, and there's definitely a nostalgic connection. Like, I love the Switch physical release for Wonder Boy, where they put that on the cartridge, which is absolutely hysterical to me. But looking at my NES cartridges next to his Master System cartridges, like even my Atari cartridges looked cooler than those. And I look at something exactly.
The release of the PS4, they did it's a reversible sleeve.
Yeah, they did that on Switch too. And did you see the Switch cartridge? The actual cart itself has that.
No.
It's the same brownish reddish color. It's just that with Wonder Boy written on it, like a Sega Master System cartridge. That's nice. The sticker. It's so I almost went out and bought it, because I was like, do I need to spend money on this right now? No, but man, that is just too cool to pass up. That's so nice.
Wow. Yeah, I had. Well, no, my brother had a Master System. He wasn't much of a gamer anyway, so I was playing it most of the time. I ended up buying games for it. But I played it a lot and I loved it, but I was always aware, and I think a lot of Master System owners will tell you that, I was always aware that there's something off about it.
There's something off about it.
The music had to be... You tolerated the music more than enjoyed it. and certainly the box art wasn't exactly... what you expect, what you wanted from a game console. It was so bland and office-like,
it was very, very strange.
It was odd,
not very imaginative.
I think for us, a lot of the excitement was that a lot of the arcade titles were available on that platform,
and they were better too.
Yeah, and they weren't great, but I think they were, for an 8-bit port, they were quite good. So you could play Afterburner, you could play Outrun, you could play Shinobi, you could play a lot of Sega
Space
Harrier. Yeah, you could play a lot of these titles that you couldn't only find in arcade normally, and suddenly you had, like, when we started playing Outrun at home, I think we played it for a month flat. It was fantastic, because Outrun is one of my favorite arcade game, like, ever, so when I got Outrun at home, I was like, oh my god, it's like the arcade version,
I remember a similar situation, Hang On, the original Hang On.
Yeah.
I loved that game. When my friend Kris showed me the Master System version, I was like, where's the music? There's no music. What happened to the music? It was half of why I loved that so much was that great music, and they play like a snippet of it over the title screen, and then when you actually get to the racing, it's dead silence. It's like, oh, why? What? No, why'd you do that?
I remember a friend of mine had an Amstrad CPC. It was the 6128, and we were playing Outrun on that as well, but if I remember, the version didn't have the music in game, but what it came with was an audio tape with the original music on it. So when we started the game, you played the original music to the game. Now, a huge attraction of the game is the music. Let's be honest about it. It's just so summery and evocative, whatever. The music is fantastic on it. So when we were playing the Amstrad port, which is terrible, but with the music from the arcade, we were there, man. We were. Yeah, it was. It's those memories like that, even though they're not objective, are just what makes us, collect, obviously, and love those games. So
what's kind of fun about the music thing, though, this is a really interesting tidbit. So my wife had a Master System. She grew up with a Master System and a Sega Genesis. She's never had any Nintendo stuff. She's not like a huge gamer, but she had them when she was a kid. So I had never heard of the game Psycho Fox before.
Oh yeah.
But you covered a song from Psycho Fox, and on the YouTube video you start with the sound effect that it makes when you start the game. I was playing that in the house, and Karen was like, "What is that? I know that." I'm like, "It's some game called Psycho Fox." She's like, wow, I know that game. I remember this game. It blew me away. So the other day, me and my son John and Karen are down here, and we're looking for something to do. So we had a snow day because we just had that big nor'easter here, and we were sent home from work early. And we're down here in the basement. Ellie's napping. We're looking for something to do. And I was just listening to your music recently, and the Psycho Fox song came on again. And I turned on Psycho Fox on my because I don't have the cartridge, so I turned on the Raspberry Pi, and I was like, John was like, "Are you gonna play a game, Daddy?" I said, "No, Mommy's gonna play a game." So I turned it on, and I sat Karen down, and I was like, "Here's the controller." So what are we doing? Oh my God! She looked at Psycho Fox. I said, "What do I do?" I said, "I don't know. I've never played this before. You have." And then she starts remembering all the different things about how to play the game. Like, oh, you can grab on this thing, and it'll launch you if you swing back and forth. And I remember these guys, and you can punch. And it was so fun watching that happen with her because she doesn't do a lot of gaming, but your cover of Psycho Fox reintroduced that to her life, so that's pretty wild. Yeah, man, you blew her mind with that.
It's a really cool game. It would have been better if it wasn't for the character inertia in the game. I think.
Oh my God, yeah, I played it for the first time the other day, and like that game's. It's really weird.
Yeah,
it's hard to control.
It's not the easiest game to control, and it would have been. It was supposed to be the Sega Master System's answer to Mario, essentially, But if they hadn't introduced that inertia that you find in Wonder Boy 3 as well, which works a bit better there, but in Psycho
works a lot better there.
Yeah, it makes things way too slippery and out of control. It's a shame because it's actually a very, very fun game, and it's such a happy tune.
What a great tune. The whole soundtrack in that is really good, actually, but that first tune is really good, and
it looks gorgeous. The characters are really cute. That little fox, it's beautiful. It's a happy game. It's probably a bit too out of control to play, but yeah, that's good. But music does stuff like that to people. It's interesting, especially video game music. Like, I've had people who are not gamers themselves nowadays, but hear some of the stuff I've done and go, oh yeah, I know that, yeah, or I remember that. They couldn't remember the game itself, but they could remember the tune, which is interesting because I always said, I think music is one of the most, with smell or taste, but it's one of the most evocative sense. You hear something, you watch a screenshot and you're just watching the screenshot. You might remember the game, but that's all you just concentrate on a screenshot. But you hear a tune and suddenly it just brings back where you were, who you were with, what happened, how you experienced it at the time. It actually brings back emotions, which visuals don't quite do. They do to some extent, but not to the extent music does. And I mean, I've been a musician at this stage most of my life, and I still get in awe of how music works and what it can do to somebody. And how you can, with just a few notes or silences between notes, how you can bring up emotions, not just in yourself but in people. I remember doing a cover of Final Fantasy, was it 10, of to Zanarkand. Anyway, it's a very slow piece.
That was the PSP game, was it?
PS2 game, Final Fantasy. I can't remember.
Oh yeah,
but anyway, but I've seen a lot of versions, and I was never happy with their version, and that's why I wanted to do it, because I think it can work on any instrument. But the trick there is the silence. It's actually have the silence between the notes just right, and that's the only way that tune works. Which a lot of people haven't quite realized, I think. But I think music like that is amazing because it relies on both it relies on so many elements, like rhythm, obviously, the harmonies, but also the silence. It's all timing. Music is timing. I think that's where you find a lot of comedians. Very good comedians are also very good musicians because they both rely on timing.
That's a good point. I never thought about that.
Yeah, well, I don't know much about comedians in the States, but in France, and you'll find in the UK and Ireland as well, you'll find a lot of them can actually play an instrument as well. Not all of them, but it's not an uncommon thing to see. And it's the bottom line is timing, being able to time your delivery. It's the only thing that makes music good is good timing, and it's the only thing that makes good comedy good. It's good timing. I think it's one of the things. Material itself is partly relevant, but not as much as a good delivery and timing.
That was what drew me to your covers in the first place, actually, was the because I'd heard a lot of different covers of Castlevania Vampire Killer before, but you were one of the few that actually got the timing right. And that's so important. Like there's that
my first cover was raw as fuck as well, like.
It was, but you could definitely tell when you were going for it, like you hit all the notes in a way that made sense, like in a way that actually really worked with the way the music is supposed to work. And that was one of the things that really drew me to that, because I had heard a bunch of different covers of it before, and people tend to kind of mush over the dun, 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 that part right after there where you got that part gets a little complicated, and the timing has got to be just right on that, and you nailed the timing on that. It's exactly, and that was one of the things that really impressed me about your cover in the first place, and one of the reasons I stuck with your channel was because of that. You got the soul of that tune right, and when you get the soul of that right, when you really break it down to, I was talking PPF before I interviewed him, right before I interviewed you on Stone Age Gamer. He does a similar thing where he really, really nails the soul of a song. And you were just talking about like the silences, your cover of Link's Awakening, the Inside the House song. Oh, yeah. There's silences in there, and you don't rush through any of those silences, and that's something that is I'm a drummer. Any band I've been in, I've always been the drummer, forcing musicians sometimes to pay attention to the mathematical amount of space that has to take place in between notes, and how long you're supposed to stay silent is a very important part of what makes music work. And you're absolutely right, that negative space is just as important as the positive space, because otherwise you're just listening to somebody play a guitar solo. And while that can be fun, once you lose the timing, everything you can't dance to it. It doesn't move you the same way. And good music the best music always appreciates that negative space, you know. And
yeah, and I think that's why a lot of guitar shredding in general is sort of a you know, it's not it's a pursuit that can't actually have you know, proper outcome. It's just because when you're just trying to outdo the amount of notes that you can put into a limited amount of space or time, yeah, you're gonna fall on your head at some point. It's music is very much, for me anyway, that's the interpretation I have, is very much about the silent space or the negative space. Not always, but yeah. Were you ever tempted to do your own covers or music?
Yes.
You've had a few bands, I believe, but
yeah.
What about, you know, covers and that kind of stuff?
Oh goodness, I've wanted to do that for a long time. I've just never had the talent for it. I remember my parents bought me a keyboard when I was a kid, and I remember always I could always figure out the melodies of things, like the main melodies of things. It's when you start to do multiple things at once, like with both hands, that's when I started to get things would start to fall apart. But I remember Star Fox, the music to the Super Nintendo version of Star Fox. I used to play getting the controls scheme together. That I used to play that music on the keyboard a lot. I was very close to starting an all Katamari cover band with a roommate of mine at one point, because he's a friend named Ben. He's an amazing classical guitarist, and I was playing Katamari around the house a lot. And the kind of map screen music in the original Katamari is this stunningly gorgeous tune. And one day he just started playing it on guitar, and I was like, oh my God, how did you do that? And he's just showing me all the different notes and how he's playing it, and it's like, we should do this. And we started to almost think about putting things together. But you know, I've wanted to do it a lot, because I guess similar to you, you've covered a handful of stuff that nobody does. Like, nobody covers MSX tunes. Like, what was the last one you just did? The Lotus Turbo something?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, Lotus.
I don't know that game. I've never heard anybody attempt to cover that music before, but it's super cool. And it was actually fun. When that video came out, I was listening to it with John, my son, and he was like, well, what does the game look like? So we looked up a video of the game, and we heard the original version and looked at the game, and then that went down a whole rabbit hole of racing games. But I have definitely wanted to do it. It's just a matter of trying to figure out how to make my hands do it, because like keyboards, I can kind of, if I could just record it piece by piece and then just layer them together, I could probably do that with a keyboard, and I am okay with my accordion, but like, you know, I can't figure out chords and stuff on guitars. I just my brain doesn't connect that way, and so I've never been able to put my own arrangements together as much as I'd want to, because there's definitely video game songs that I adore that I would love to have covers of that just I've never seen anybody do, like stuff from Balloon Kid, or I mentioned Donkey Kong Land before, like even a bunch of stuff from Wizards and Warriors, you know, like there's
I want to do more from that, actually.
Iron Sword Wizards and Warriors 2 has such an incredible soundtrack. The final boss battle music, Icefire Mountain from Wizards and Warriors 2 is that's all time for me. Like, that is so high up there on my list of things I love, and I've never heard anybody attempt to cover it before. And especially like between you and PPF, like seeing the level of what you guys have gotten to as far as covering things so beautifully, like I just know that I wouldn't be able to do that.
Well, you get better at it. I mean, the first covers I did were fairly rough, you know. It just you get better at it. That's one of the driving factor behind the channel now at this stage, is how can I, you know, get better at things and try new techniques and all that. But the driving factor to start it was literally what you said, is that I was like, well, nobody's covering that. And I've always been like, if you want something and nobody's doing it, well, you can do two things. You can either complain that nobody's doing it, or you can do it yourself.
Or you can do it, yeah.
Yeah, so that was the reason I started the channel. I was like, I remember asking Smooth McGroove at the time, it's like, you know, any plans on doing that? And he said, I don't know. So I was like, all right, I'll do it then.
Well, that's Waveback for me. That's what that is. I mean, there was a podcast called Super Mercado Brothers that a friend of mine pointed out to me, and that podcast is pretty big, and they do very similar to what I do with Waveback, but I did not. I mean, no offense to them, but I didn't connect with the show. They didn't seem to they clearly appreciated the music, but on a very different way than I do. So, and I kept looking for other video game music podcasts, and I didn't see them. So with listening to Ferg do that thing solo, I said, all right, I'm going to do this solo. I'm going to create this thing because I want this to exist. And that was the whole point behind it.
What I like about your podcast is that it's a very you listen to music and you analyze it to some extent, but on a very sort of human level. You know, it's about your appreciation for a tune. There's a tendency I've noticed in a lot of people who do analysis of songs is to rely too much on the technique behind it, or you know, the musical arrangements or analyzing it. It just becomes musical mathematics after a while. Mm-hmm. And I think that's actually detrimental to your appreciation of music. Music is not about the theory behind it. Now, you can argue that, you know, those composers have very intricate theory and that kind of stuff, but for a lot of them, you will find that it just happens because they are that good and they are that, you know, naturally gifted at composing. They didn't actually sit down and did the maths and, you know, to compose something. They didn't sit down and go, okay, I need this arrangement and then here because this emotion is generated by the fifth sustain, whatever. It's not how people compose. It just isn't. It is how you compose when you're in college and learning about music theory, but it's not afterwards how you compose at all. So it's I've seen a lot of channels just analyzing, and I think it kills music, that sort of music maths that's applied to every tune that you love. Like there's a reason why it's good and evocative, and it's not mathematics.
You're absolutely
right. You
can
explain it that way, but it's only one way to explain it, and I think it's sort of the easy way. Everybody can do, you know, mathematics to some extent, but. So I'm not sure where I'm going with this actually, but it's
well, the recent episode we just recorded with Kirby's Adventure, I like lost it at the end of it. The final boss music in that game is so incredible, and what we do is we listen to it live. We're both listening to the music at the same time, and so I got these big headphones on. I'm just blaring it, and I'm just listening to it on my own. And every now and then, like when I do music that really gets me, it will just get me. And I had a hard time talking afterwards. So if you want to listen to the next episode of Wave Back and hear me really, really nerd out, like I was laughing so much so that I wouldn't start crying. You know, it was like the music gets me so much that it just I'm such a dork, and I could not avoid it. And that was one of the things that was so important to me about doing Wave Back, is that like this music means, obviously I like other music too. I do occasionally listen to other pieces of music, but for me, music has always been 100% about melody. Like I'll forgive or not even pay attention to lyrics more than anything in the world if there's a good melody behind it. You know, one of the first songs I remember liking in my life is Stand by REM, and what the hell do those lyrics mean? Like it's a ridiculous song, but that melody caught me, and that's I guess one of the big connections with me and video game music is that it's all melody. There's rarely lyrics to it. So when that kind of stuff gets me, it gets me, and I wear that stuff on my sleeve. And I know folks that I've tried to talk about this stuff with, they look at me like I got 16 heads, and but this music means the world to me. It means so much to me, and
we'll leave the links to the podcast, the Wave Back and Stone Age Gamer podcast in the comments for people. I'll go listen to it after this. But and it's funny because music, music gets you, and it gets you every time you listen to it. It's not just a one-sided
every time.
Again, you know, graphics, and I paint. I love painting, but a visual representation of something will hit you once, and then you can watch it and find new details. You can get lost in different ways, but music will hit you in the same way every time you listen to it, and it doesn't matter how many times you've listened to it, it will just evoke the same kind of feelings. And it's
always exciting when you find new ones too.
It's a fascinating medium
when music hits you. Super Mario Brothers 3, the regular overworld music. I've been listening to it for ages, since 1989 when it came out. Like, I love that music. Mario Maker comes out 2 years ago, and the brilliant thing that they did in Mario Maker was when you're creating the stages, like the music's consistently playing the whole time. when you switch into maker mode, it plays this sort of like counter melody music that like goes underneath it. So we did an episode of Waveback where what I did was I was so interested in this music because I downloaded the soundtrack and I'm listening to this counter melody music and I'm always humming the main melodies over my head. So what I did was I just took the main melodies and I plopped them on top of the counter melody music, and it sounds incredible. And particularly the main overworld music in Super Mario 3, it made me listen to that song differently. This song I've been listening to for years. I hear it differently now because there's just this kind of extra thing going on underneath it. And it's like, wow, this kind of call and answer bit that they do in this, like, I never really realized. I wonder if that's what Kondo was going for when he wrote that, you know, and it's absolutely amazing. I love when you can discover new things about music, especially when it's something like 8-bit music that you the depths that you can find in some of this stuff is incredible. What these artists were able to pull out of it is just nuts. Yeah,
there's one thing that happens very often, pretty much every cover I do, is Fiona is the first one to listen to it, and I'm like, you know, what do you think? And but so I get her to listen to the original first, and then the cover after that. And it's always, oh my god, I didn't realize how good that tune was. Once she hears a version with instrumentation and backing, bass and that kind of stuff, and then we re-listen to the original tune, and she goes, okay, now I hear it. But it's for me, it's an exercise where to try and sort of legitimize these tunes, because as gamers we're used to them and we understand the qualities behind them, but people who aren't experienced gamers or aren't, you know, gaming as much as we do, they're just kind of little ditties or little.
They hear bleeps and bloops.
Yeah, bleeps and,
you know,
exactly. So I'm trying to actually. That's what the purpose of the channel is, to sort of legitimize and tell people like how solid compositions they actually were, because they genuinely were fully fledged composition. It's only the limitation of the hardware that actually stopped them. But you can layer them in ways that the original composer never thought of, or maybe thought or intended subliminally, but hasn't introduced because they couldn't, you know.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that, because I remember when you did the cover of Super Mario Brothers, because that's like one of the great, that's the tune everybody knows. Yeah. But when was the last time you actually sat and really listened to, like, holy crap, this is a really well put together song? And I remember reading your Patreon posts about it, like, if I'm please forgive me if I'm remembering this wrong. You were saying that there was like something you kind of avoided doing because you never really thought there was much to it, and then as you were putting it together, you realized how much there really is to that song. And your cover of it came out amazing, and it's always so interesting to me, because that's the song everyone knows. Everyone knows the Super Mario Brothers theme, but when you really sit and listen to just all how the parts fit together, it's brilliant. That's why it sticks in your head.
What's really cool about that song is it's a 3-harmony essentially melody, like it's just, but there's a harmony and then the second harmony, so there's 3 layers to it. And everybody knows the main melody. What's interesting is that you could play each part separately and they would stand on their own as legitimate melodies. So if you play the second
Mario Maker does that.
Yeah,
that's what the counter melody is. It's so good. Go on.
Yeah, so then it's probably where it comes from. It's because the original tune, each part of that tune and the stuff that you don't quite hear because they're played exactly at the same time, but is a legitimate melody on its own. It's a very, very interesting tune, actually. It's much more interesting than I realized at the time when. I thought it was like, I don't know how to cover it. It's just such a simple little melody, which it isn't quite actually. But and then when you start listening to the harmony and then the bass harmony, like it's really, really, really cool tune, I have to say. So, Kris, I think we've been chatting for an hour and a half.
Yeah,
probably more than that. I've nothing to do for the rest of the day, so we could keep chatting. But I'm sure you have stuff to do. But what's next for Geekade and the Stone Age Gamer podcast? More the same?
Oh. Well, actually, I mean, it's somewhat the same, somewhat different. We were invited to do a panel at Long Island Retro, so we're going to be doing that. We just started the preliminary plans for our annual charity stream called the Pain in the Assathon, where we raise money for colon cancer awareness. Pain in the ass, colon cancer, haha. where we play difficult games for 24 hours and don't sleep, and it's difficult. The last 2 years, I have beaten Link Faces of Evil and Zelda Wand of Gamelon. So this year is Zelda's Adventure, and I will have played through and defeated the Unholy Triforce for Philips CDI.
Wow.
God, those games are so bad. They're so much worse than... I always tell people, like, you've seen the Angry Video Game Nerd video, but I promise you you have no idea the depths of how bad they are until you have the controller in your hand, because they are unfathomably bad.
Shite.
Absolute and complete.
I should get Simon to do a review of
that would be great.
Evil, actually. That could be a cool one.
That could be cool. I miss Simon.
So do you have obviously social links, Twitter, Facebook? Have you a Patreon account or anything like that?
No, we're everything we do except for, but like I said, I mentioned before in my writing, everything else we do on Geekade is completely free, so we don't make any money. But I'm on Twitter. I'm at Geekade Kris, Geekade Kris.
Okay.
And find me on Facebook. Follow the Stone Age Gamer blog, and if you look up Stone Age Gamer, you'll probably see me in some way, shape, or form hawking my personality, because every now and then someone listens to it, and that makes me unbelievably happy. And I'm lucky enough that people let me do it. But
and thank you very much for inviting me on your podcast.
Thanks for coming on, man. That was like, you made my day. And it's always fun when I get to tell people that I know somebody in Ireland. Like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna do a podcast with a guy in Ireland. I gotta set up the time difference and stuff. It's like super cool. It makes me feel all important.
For me, I'm doing a podcast with people over in the States, and I think there's I have a few guys, somebody in Germany planned soon. Interestingly, after that Lotus Turbo Challenge cover, I started talking to Barry Leitch, which is the composer of the tune. He approached me on Facebook, and we're going to do an episode like this.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
So I think that was recording that Monday. Yeah,
I love it when stuff like that happens. I remember when you got what David Wise tweeted that he liked your Wizard Warriors cover, and I was just like, man, that must have been a thrill. The closest I ever had to that was we did an episode of Waveback of One Hit Wonders, where we picked games that had only one or two songs that were really I really liked, and the rest of the soundtrack was just not there, or there was no other music. And one of the games I did was an old PC game called Degeneration, and I tried to find out who wrote the tune, and I wound up coming into contact with Mark TDK Knight, who he let us use his song Chubby Chubby Chip Chip for our Stone Age Gamer podcast theme song, but he's worked on other stuff, like he did the music for Mario's Time Machine for Super Nintendo and that kind of stuff. He pointed me to Sean Googler, who's the guy who wrote the actual music for Degeneration, and so Degeneration got remade recently on Xbox One and PS4, and Mark Knight did the remade music, so it's just how I came in contact with him. And what he found out from me contacting Sean was that what he found the music to do a new rendition of for the new game was based off of playing Degeneration on DOSBox, the emulator DOSBox. And for some reason, when you play it on there, it cuts out a bunch of notes from the music. So the new remade music in Degeneration is missing a bunch of notes.
Is the glitchy...
Is the weird glitchy version. They've made a cover out of that because it still works as a song without those bits. But what Sean... Yes, silences again. So the thing is that the version that I had was I recorded straight from my DOSBox, but it has a jetpack sound effect in it because I just recorded the game playing, and I wanted to see if Sean could give me a version without the jetpack, and that's how we came up with. Oh no, that version's missing all these notes, so let me get you an original version. And it turns out the jetpack sound effect was actually built into the song itself, so that they wouldn't have to add a sound effect in this part of the game. And so he gave me a 100% unique version of the song, the only one in existence that does not have the jetpack sound effect and is in there. And he told me I could use it on that episode and don't give it to anybody else. So if you want to hear the version of the DOS version of this obscure PC game Degeneration, the way it was meant to be, you got to listen to the way.
Wow, that's really cool. Isn't the internet just an amazing medium?
Wild place.
Stuff like that, yeah.
It really is.
I love when stuff like that. Yeah, I regularly get composers sending me a message on Facebook. It's it's amazing. Like I've chatted to Chris Hughes so many times now. It's yeah, and he's my hero, like from back then. Like hopefully we'll do one of these with him as well. We have it sort of penned down, but we just need to find a. He's touring America in an RV. He sold his house with his wife, and they're
wow, that's cool.
RV, and he's composing from there still. So I want to do a podcast where I ask him not about music, but about what that is like, because there's a few podcasts of him with music, but I think and that's his life right now. So I think that's what we should talk about. But
that's awesome.
Kris Randazzo, my friend, thank you very much. I'm really glad we did this. It was cool after you invited me twice. It's nice to interview the interviewer, although there was more a chat about nothing and everything really. But
it was my pleasure.
Thank you so much.
I'll plug one more thing.
Yeah.
Nintendo Force magazine. It's a physical magazine that kind of follows up on Nintendo Power.
Okay.
I write for that magazine from time to time, and I should have something in the next issue. It's about Nintendo Labo and accessories and stuff. I do a article series called Peripheral Vision, where I write about weird video game peripherals. So NF Magazine, look it up. If you like physical magazines, it's super cool. I love it.
Send me all your links that you have. We'll put them in
I'll
description.
I'll send everything.
Put them in the comments.
Thank you very much for having me on. It was a blast.
It was a treat, dude. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. And see you next time.
That was a hoot.